Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. It's Monday, the 4th of August, 2025. Today is day 668. I'm joining you now from Amman, Jordan. I'll be in the Middle East for the next 10 days for meetings here in Jordan, in the occupied West Bank, in Jerusalem as well. So I'll have updates about those in the days ahead. I wanted to give you the news of the last 24 hours on the 668th day of the atrocities going on in Gaza. On Sunday afternoon, the health ministry reported that there were 119 people killed and an additional 866 wounded just in the past day. Medics said that there were 16 who were killed while they were seeking aid. It is hard just to imagine the death tolls day by day by day by day, and how they're now well over 60,000 people, and our work has been ineffective. And there are lots of different strategies to ending the atrocities in Gaza. And I think each of us has a role to play. And one of the things that's happening sometimes is within the movement that's seeking to end the atrocities, there's criticism of different methodologies. And friends, I would just say that we need all methodologies. We need prayer, but we need not only prayer, we need action. We need people to be willing to do civil disobedience. Not all of us can do that. It would limit our ability to be able to have impact in the government sector. And so each of us has a role to play. And I'd encourage you to work to sort out what your role is specifically. If it's writing op-eds, if it's calling your members of Congress, all of us can do that, at least if we're in the US and US citizens. That's part of the privilege and responsibility of citizenship. So please, please, please engage. The health ministry in Gaza also announced that 5 people, all adults, died of hunger or malnutrition in the last 24 hours. This brings the number of deaths from hunger or malnutrition to 180 people, including 93 children. 93 children have died of starvation, 180 people total. 5 Israelis were arrested as police blocked a march to the border in Gaza, calling for an end to the siege in the enclave. Israeli news described the protests as a leftist march calling to break the siege on the Gaza Strip. And they described how it was blocked by Israeli police on Monday, shortly after setting off to Israel to the border from the city of Sderot. Sderot is one of the cities that was attacked on October 7th. It's the largest city in the south of Gaza that's that close to the border, and that's where the protesters left from. It's about 1 mile away from the fence for Gaza. They were arrested for disturbing the peace. More than 100 journalists, photographers, and war correspondents signed a petition demanding immediate and unsupervised foreign press access to the Gaza Strip. And the Palestinian Red Crescent Society yesterday accused Israeli forces of killing 1 worker and injuring 3 others in a deliberate attack on the humanitarian organization's headquarters in Gaza. The IDF said they're reviewing the claim that the building was damaged and that uninvolved individuals were harmed. A 47-truck UN convoy was wholly overrun and ransacked within 3 hours last Wednesday, with hundreds of thousands, that's in quotes, of aid seekers surging towards the entry checkpoint as Israeli troops fired rifle and artillery rounds. This is according to the UN World Food Programme's Mission Security Report. The Washington Post reported this. A UN official said the security report said that more than 50 people were killed and 600 people injured during the mission. The health ministry recorded at least 209 deaths among people seeking aid since Saturday. So the numbers are a bit different depending on the day and depending on which report you're looking at. Israel's told multiple journalists reporting from aid flights that they're prohibited from filming Gaza from above. A Washington Post photojournalist who was not initially given such instructions last week captured rare, low-altitude aerial views of the scale of destruction and displacement in the territory. That was also the Washington Post. Hamas responded to Israel's request to allow the Red Cross access to the hostages. They said they would agree to the request by the Red Cross, but it would depend on Gaza aid crossings remaining open and stopping air traffic while aid packages are delivered to hostages. So that's an update on Gaza. In the occupied West Bank, I wrote about this village previously in May of 2023. It's called El Khair. It's in the occupied West Bank. There is a family there that I'm close to. I wrote about the Sheikh Haj Suleiman Hathalin and how he was killed by extremist settlers back in 2023. He was killed prior to that, but I wrote about it in 2023. Now, 3 years later, another member of the Hathalin family was killed. Local activist Alda was shot by a settler just in the past week or so. According to Israeli reports, the suspected shooter, Yanan Levy, was released from house arrest just this past Sunday and was already seen working on the land that he was working on just before the shooting took place. Levy was documented as firing his handgun during an altercation with residents from the village of Melcher. And 4 Palestinians were arrested after Levy pointed them out to Israeli forces. Hathalin was shot in the chest, even though he was not involved in the incident, and he stood approximately 30 meters, which is about 90 feet away. Today, Israeli news announced that 3 Palestinians from that village, who were arrested after the killing of Aldeh Hathalin, were released from custody, but there's still 4 additional residents that are held in Israel. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu will convene the Security Cabinet next week in order to instruct the IDF on how to reach 3 objectives that he has set for the war in Gaza. Those 3 objectives are: 1, defeating the enemy; 2, releasing the hostages; and 3, ensuring that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. A 20-year-old Palestinian died in Israel's Megiddo prison after being detained without trial. So this person was under administrative detention. He'd been detained since May. He was the 6th prisoner to die in prison since October 2023. That's been reported. Survivors of the Hamas invasion on October 7th will once again hold a separate memorial ceremony at the 2-year anniversary of the attack, boycotting the official state-run ceremony. God have mercy that we're talking about the 2nd anniversary of those October 7th attacks, and that the atrocities in Gaza continue day after day after day. Today in Israel, if the government approves the recommendation of the ministerial committee that's headed by the Diaspora Affairs Minister, there is a question of whether or not they will dismiss the Attorney General Gali Baharav Mira. If they approve that, it will succeed in removing the last obstacle stopping the indicted Prime Minister Netanyahu from halting the proceedings against himself. So that's significant in Israel today. Also, Hostage Families Forum said that Netanyahu is leading Israel and the hostages to doom. They said Netanyahu is preparing the largest possible scam. His talking points about releasing the hostages while claiming victory in Gaza have been made repeatedly and are meant to deceive the public. They also said that expanding the war endangers the lives of the hostages, who are already in imminent danger of death. In terms of international engagement, German Chancellor Merz, French President Macron, British Foreign Secretary Lamy have condemned Hamas's videos that showed the emaciated Israeli hostages being held by the group in Gaza. The International Committee of the Red Cross said they were appalled by the videos and reiterated its call to be granted access to the hostages. In the U.S., I don't know if you're aware, the U.S. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, became the first highest-ranking elected official to visit settlements in the West Bank when he spoke at a conference in the settlement of Ariel. It's unfathomable that a U.S. member of Congress is speaking in Israeli settlements, which is land that's been confiscated from Palestinian families and communities. Haaretz reported about this, about how he addressed the settler conference. They described it as a highly unusual move of one of America's most powerful elected officials. They said Johnson has long been an ally of the Israeli right, using his perch as the House Speaker to lend support to efforts bolstering right-wing positions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, both within the U.S. and Israel. According to the chairman of the Republican Overseas Israel, Huckabee said that the mountains of Judea and Samaria are the rightful property of the Jewish people, while criticizing countries calling to recognize a Palestinian state. The U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, on Saturday told families of hostages held by Hamas that he's working collectively with the Israeli government to create a plan that would effectively end the war in Gaza. He also said Hamas is prepared to disarm in order to end the war, but Hamas said that they would not relinquish armed resistance unless there's an independent, fully sovereign Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. The U.S. has dispersed an initial amount of the $30 million that was approved for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation as of last Friday. So that's about 10%, $3 million that's been dispersed of the $30 million. President Trump keeps saying that the U.S. has contributed $60 million for food in Gaza. Victims and relatives of people killed or injured in Hamas and Hezbollah attacks last Thursday filed a lawsuit attempting to hold the UN Agency for Palestinians responsible, that's UNRWA, to hold them responsible for some measure for the two groups' violent act. There's a similar case that's been playing out since last year in a federal court in Manhattan. Finally, I wanted to let you know that Pastor Ara Torosian, an Iranian refugee and leader in a Los Angeles church, is urging President Trump to stop the deportation of Iranian and Afghan Christians who have fled brutal religious persecution in their homelands. Torosian, who fasted and prayed outside the White House, said that ICE recently detained multiple members of his church, including a couple separated from their children and threatened with return to their countries where they will risk death for their faith. The pastor's emotional plea highlights a wave of detentions after a new policy shift revoked humanitarian status for many asylum seekers who entered legally under those programs. Church leaders, advocates, and groups like World Relief warn that deporting these believers violates religious freedom, puts innocent lives at risk, and they're calling on U.S. leaders to uphold their promises to protect the persecuted. So that's an update about Christians in the Middle East. May God go before us in our continued efforts. In the name of Christ, amen.